My daughter looked me in the eye, her face contorted in a mask of pure contempt I'd never seen directed at me before. Her husband stood beside her, a smug, knowing smirk playing on his lips. We were in my living room, a room I had always considered the heart of our family gatherings, filled with memories of birthdays, holidays, and shared laughter. Now it felt cold, hostile. "We need the money now, Mom," she said, her voice hard, utterly devoid of warmth. "Just sign the papers. It's not like you need this big old house anymore. What are you waiting for? Just I don't give a SAT. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe families should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. Her words hung in the air, a physical blow. My own daughter, the child I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, had just told me to die so she could get her hands on my property. In that horrifying instant, the comfortable, familiar world I knew shattered. It wasn't just the cruelty of the words, it was the casual entitlement behind them, the clear implication that my value was solely tied to my death and what I would leave behind. It forced me to confront a terrible possibility, that perhaps my family, or at least this part of it, saw me as nothing more than a source of money, a roadblock to their desired future. For decades, I had been the bedrock of my family. After my husband passed away unexpectedly 20 years ago, leaving me with 2 young children and a mortgage, I had worked tirelessly, often holding down 2 jobs, to keep our home, put food on the table, and ensure my children had opportunities one never did. I prioritized their education, helped with down payments on their first homes, provided financial support through lean times, and babysat grandchildren at a moment's notice. My daughter, especially, had always been the focus of my care. She was my firstborn, and like many mothers and daughters, we had a complex, sometimes challenging, but ultimately loving bond, or so I believed. I had always taught them the importance of family, of looking out for one another, of kindness and respect. My home had always been open to them, a safe harbor. This property, inherited partially from my parents, and the rest paid off through years of hard work, represented my security, my independence, and the culmination of my life's efforts. It was more than just a house, it was my anchor. But what she discovered next would force her to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. My life since losing my husband had been centered around stability and ensuring my children were well provided for. My son lived in a different state and was largely independent, supportive in his own quiet way. My daughter, Clara, and her husband, Mark, however, lived only an hour away. I had always been generous with them, helping out with bills, unexpected expenses, and contributing significantly to my grandchildren's college funds. I had a comfortable, but not extravagant, retirement nest egg, mostly tied up in my property, a small investment portfolio, and some savings. My financial advisor had always cautioned me to be careful, but I had always waved away his concerns, insisting my family would never put me in a difficult position. Clara and Mark had always seemed to struggle financially, despite both having decent jobs. There was always something: a car repair, a leaky roof, a lost bonus. I had initially sympathized and helped whenever I could, happy to ease their burdens. But over the last year, the requests for money had become more frequent, and the tone had shifted. What started as requests became expectations, then demands. They began talking more and more about the value of my house, mentioning renovation potential and market trends during casual conversations. They'd drop hints about needing more space, or how difficult it was to save for a bigger place with their current expenses. I started to feel less like a helpful mother and more like a walking ATM. Their visits, once filled with genuine connection, now felt transactional, always circling back to money or my assets. I noticed subtle changes. Mark would leave financial documents accidentally open on his laptop when he visited, hinting at their struggles. Clara would sigh dramatically about their mounting debts. The turning point came unexpectedly. Clara and Mark had been visiting, pushing me harder than ever about selling the house and moving into a smaller apartment, ostensibly so they could help me manage my finances and simplify my life. They insisted the house was too much for me, a burden. I resisted, telling them I was perfectly capable of managing my home and finances and that I loved my neighborhood and my independence. The argument escalated quickly, culminating in Clara's venomous outburst, "Just die, I don't give a SHT," followed by Mark's equally cold agreement. I was stunned into silence. They left shortly after, the air thick with unspoken cruelty and my own shock. Once they were gone, the silence in the house was deafening, amplifying the echo of her hateful words. I walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects, trying to reconcile the daughter I thought I knew with the person who had just wished me dead. The initial shock gave way to a wave of profound hurt, then a chilling realization. This wasn't just anger. This was calculated cruelty, born from a desire for my death and the inheritance it would bring. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. Was I mistaken? Had I misheard? I replayed the scene in my head, her tone, her expression, Mark's confirming smirk. No, there was no mistaking it. They meant it. My daughter and her husband wanted me gone. The pain was unbearable, a physical ache in my chest. For a brief, terrible moment, I considered just giving in, signing whatever papers they wanted, just to make the pain stop, to restore some semblance of peace, even if it was a false one. But then, anger, cold and sharp, began to cut through the hurt. How dare they? How dare they treat me with such callous disregard after everything I had done for them? How dare they look at my home, my security, my life, and see only dollar signs? This wasn't just about money. It was about their fundamental lack of respect, their complete disregard for my well-being. My initial denial, the instinct to excuse their behavior as a moment of anger or frustration, evaporated. This was deeper, darker. I felt a prickle of fear, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing resolve. I wouldn't let them do this. I wouldn't let them strip me of my dignity and my home. My first defensive action was small but symbolic. I went to my desk, found the property deed and my financial statements, and locked them in a safe deposit box I hadn't used in years, making a mental note to change the combination. It felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet declaration that I would not be easily conquered. After that confrontation, things rapidly escalated. Clara and Mark's calls and texts became relentless. They switched tactics, alternating between guilt trips, "How can you do this to your own daughter?" and fabricated emergencies, "We might lose the house if you don't help us now." They enlisted my sister, who, bless her heart, always tried to be a peacemaker, to pressure me. "They're your family, you need to work this out," she'd plead, clearly unaware of the depth of their manipulation. I kept my distance, responding minimally, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't fight this alone, not with emotional pleas or family arguments. I needed facts, evidence, and professional guidance. I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of their increasingly aggressive texts, saved voicemails, and jotted down notes about the dates and times of their calls and visits, recording what was said. I photographed the locks on my doors and the security system I had reluctantly installed years ago but now checked daily. I compiled copies of every check I had ever written to them, every significant gift I had given, every bill I had paid on their behalf. It was a painstaking process, like piecing together a painful, ugly puzzle, but with each piece of evidence I collected, my resolve hardened. My next step was crucial: legal consultation. I called the financial advisor who had cautioned me and asked for a recommendation for a good elder law attorney, emphasizing my need for discretion. He gave me the name of a highly respected lawyer, Ms. Eleanor Vance, known for her sharp mind and compassionate approach to difficult family cases. Meeting with Ms. Vance was like stepping into a sanctuary of clarity after months in a fog of confusion and hurt. I laid out everything: the history of my generosity, the increasing demands, the confrontation, Clara's horrific words, and the evidence I had gathered. Ms. Vance listened patiently, her expression calm but attentive. She explained my rights regarding my property and assets, and more importantly, the legal avenues available to protect myself from financial exploitation and harassment. She confirmed my fears. Their behavior constituted emotional abuse and potential financial coercion. She advised me to cease all direct communication with Clara and Mark, channeling everything through her office. She also recommended securing my financial accounts, updating my will to explicitly disinherit anyone attempting to contest it based on undue influence, and potentially pursuing a restraining order if the harassment continued or escalated to physical threats. Learning my options gave me a tangible plan, a path forward beyond just reacting to their demands. It shifted my perspective from being a victim to being an active participant in protecting myself. Clara and Mark sensed the shift. My polite but firm refusal to engage directly, my insistence that they communicate through Ms. Vance, infuriated them. The pressure intensified. They started showing up unannounced at my house, sometimes bringing the grandchildren as leverage. "See, Grandma? They miss you," Clara would say, putting the children in the middle. I would only speak to the children briefly on the porch, explaining I wasn't well and couldn't have visitors, a necessary lie that twisted my gut. I couldn't bring myself to expose them to the truth, not yet. Mark began spreading rumors among extended family members, portraying me as cold, unfeeling, and mentally declining, claiming I was being manipulated by outside forces, presumably Ms. Vance or my financial advisor, to keep what was rightfully family property. This social pressure was painful, as some relatives were swayed by their narrative, while others kept a cautious distance. One evening, Mark called, bypassing Ms. Vance's number. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. His voice, usually smooth, was tight with anger. "Look, Mom, you're making a big mistake. You're old. You can't handle this. Just give us control. It'll be easier for everyone. You're being selfish. We need this." It was a stark, undisguised demand for control, confirming their true intentions beyond any doubt. This wasn't about need, it was about greed and power. This direct confrontation, however brief, solidified my resolve. I wasn't just protecting my assets, I was fighting for my autonomy, my dignity, and the right to live my remaining years in peace, free from their manipulation. Ms. Vance immediately sent them a cease and desist letter, warning against further direct contact and defamation. Their tactics only made me stronger, more determined to see this through. I began working with Ms. Vance on the legal documents, meticulously planning each step. We prepared a deed transfer, putting the property into a trust with clear instructions, established new beneficiaries for my accounts, and drafted letters to my bank and investment firms requiring my explicit, notarized consent for any significant transactions. These strategic preparations were empowering. Each document signed, each boundary established, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to steal. They created another fake emergency, claiming they needed money immediately to avoid foreclosure, sending me photos of official-looking letters that, when I discreetly ran them by Ms. Vance's paralegal, turned out to be cleverly photoshopped. Their desperation was showing, but their tactics were becoming more elaborate. I felt a quiet sense of grim satisfaction, knowing their lies were now part of my growing body of evidence. My resolve had hardened into steel. I would not be bullied, guilt-tripped, or lied to into submission. I would fight. The smoking gun appeared in the form of an envelope mistakenly delivered to my address. It was a legal document intended for Mark and Clara, outlining a loan application for a substantial amount, using my property as collateral. The document included a section requiring my signature as the property owner. Except my signature was already on it. A crude, but plausible, forgery. They weren't just planning to wait for me to die. They were trying to use my home, while I was still alive and living in it, to secure their own debt. The audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't just manipulation or greed. This was attempted fraud, a criminal act. This was the definitive proof I needed, undeniable evidence of their malicious intent. Ms. Vance was appalled but not entirely surprised. "This changes everything," she said, her voice serious. "This is attempted felony fraud. We can file a police report, but more importantly, this gives us significant legal leverage. Armed with this knowledge and the forged document, we acquired a legal weapon far more powerful than I had initially imagined." Ms. Vance immediately filed for an emergency injunction to prevent any transactions involving my property without my explicit, in-person consent, and began preparing a civil lawsuit for financial exploitation and emotional distress. She also contacted the bank listed on the loan application, providing them with the forged document and alerting them to the attempted fraud, effectively shutting down that avenue for Clara and Mark. My counter-strategy was now in full swing. Instead of just defending myself, I was actively taking the fight to them, using the legal system to protect myself and expose their actions. While Ms. Vance handled the legal maneuvers, I continued to reinforce my personal boundaries. I changed my phone number, installed a better security system with cameras, and informed my neighbors about the situation, asking them to report any suspicious activity around my house. Clara and Mark, completely unaware that I had intercepted the forged document and was working with law enforcement on the fraud angle, Ms. Vance had quietly reported the forgery, grew increasingly overconfident. They saw my silence and lack of direct engagement not as strategic preparation, but as weakness. They likely assumed I was too scared, too frail, or too confused to fight back effectively. They continued their smear campaign among the family, convinced that public opinion was on their side, and that I would eventually cave under the pressure. They made a crucial mistake, underestimating my resolve and believing their lies were foolproof. The climax arrived swiftly and decisively. One crisp autumn morning, legal documents were served at Clara and Mark's home. They weren't just papers from my civil suit. They included a summons related to the attempted bank fraud investigation, initiated based on the forged loan document. Simultaneously, the emergency injunction preventing any transactions on my property was officially filed and recorded, freezing any attempts to use my home as collateral or force a sale. Clara and Mark were blindsided. Ms. Vance had orchestrated the timing perfectly, delivering the legal notices simultaneously with the police contact. Their initial shock and panic were palpable. I received a flurry of frantic, incoherent voicemails and texts filled with threats, accusations, and desperate pleas for me to call off the lawyers and the police. They couldn't understand how I had acquired the forged document or how I had moved so quickly and decisively. They had lost control of the narrative and, more importantly, their access to my assets. Throughout their panic, I remained calm and methodical. I didn't respond to their calls or messages, simply forwarding everything to Ms. Vance. I focused on my own well-being, spending time with friends who had stood by me and finding comfort in the quiet routine of my protected home. The truth, supported by undeniable legal documents and police involvement, began to spread through the extended family and community. Relatives who had been swayed by Clara and Mark's lies were confronted with the reality of their deceit and attempted fraud. The narrative shifted dramatically from me being a cruel, withholding mother to them being manipulative, greedy individuals who had tried to steal from their own family. Faced with legal action and public exposure, Clara and Mark resorted to their final, desperate tactics. They showed up at my house again, this time with tears and apologies, promising to change, begging for forgiveness, and using the grandchildren as emotional shields once more. It was a performance, hollow and transparent. Ms. Vance had prepared me for this. I did not open the door. I simply reiterated through the closed door, calmly but firmly, that all communication must go through my attorney. Their faces, visible through the window, twisted from feigned remorse to bitter fury as they realized their emotional blackmail no longer worked. Their last attempt at manipulating me had failed. The immediate aftermath was a quiet relief. I sat in my living room, bathed in the afternoon sun, the silence no longer heavy with dread but light with peace. The legal victory wasn't loud or dramatic, it was a confirmation of my security and independence. The injunction was permanent, my assets were protected in the trust, and the civil suit was proceeding, though Ms. Vance assured me the outcome was favorable given the evidence. As for Clara and Mark, they faced the consequences of their actions, including the ongoing fraud investigation and the civil lawsuit, which would likely result in significant financial penalties. My new life had clear boundaries. My door remained closed to those who had betrayed my trust. I focused on rebuilding connections with the parts of my family that were genuine and supportive, and strengthening my friendships. There was no reconciliation, no magical moment of forgiveness. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too profound. My daughter and her husband had chosen greed over family, and that choice had consequences. As I looked out at my garden, a sense of quiet strength settled over me. I had been pushed to the brink, hurt and betrayed by the people I loved most, but I had not broken. I had stood up for myself, protected what was mine, and found my voice. The hard-won wisdom I gained came at a great cost, but it was mine. I was safe, secure, and finally at peace in my own home. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.